Imagine this: you're sipping your morning coffee, savoring the peace of your garden as the sun rises over your perfect little corner of the world. Everything feels right, until you hear it. The unmistakable sound of a bulldozer's engine starting, followed by the deep, grinding roar of the machine digging into the earth. You rush outside, heart pounding, only to see your beloved rain garden being torn apart, the very plants you had nurtured with your own hands, crushed beneath the wheels of a machine. And standing there, with their smug, self-satisfied smiles, are the HOA board members, totally unaware of the disaster they're causing in the name of uniformity. You might be wondering, how did we get here? How did something as simple as a garden become the focal point of a neighborhood war? Well, let me take you back to when it all started, when I first bought my dream home on Silverwood Lane, tucked away on a steep hill, surrounded by towering oak trees. It was everything I had ever wanted: a quaint, quiet house with a white picket fence, a front porch perfect for sipping lemonade on a warm afternoon, and a backyard that looked out onto acres of open land. I was overjoyed, I admit it. After years of renting, of moving from one place to the next, never truly feeling at home, I finally had a place to call my own. Silverwood Lane was a peaceful, charming street where the neighbors waved hello as they passed by, and everything seemed picture-perfect. The kind of neighborhood you'd want to raise kids in, or, in my case, retire to. The kind of neighborhood where people respected each other's space, where the grass was always green and the skies were always blue. But little did I know, my slice of heaven would soon be marred by something far more insidious than a few weeds or a noisy dog. No, I wasn't ready for the most unwelcome neighbor of all, the HOA. When I first received the letter from the HOA, I thought it was a joke. They were informing me that my garden, yes, the one that I had put so much time and effort into designing, had been deemed an aesthetic violation. Apparently, my rain garden, which collected water to prevent flooding, was disruptive to the uniformity of the neighborhood. Uniformity? Wasn't I allowed to express my love for nature in my own backyard? Apparently not, according to the HOA. And the worst part? They were giving me 30 days to remove it or face a fine. I couldn't believe it. The HOA had gone too far. But this wasn't just about a garden. This was about my right to live in my own home without being harassed by a group of strangers who thought they knew better than me how I should maintain my property. It wasn't just about me, it was about the countless homeowners like me, who had been quietly following the rules, doing things by the book, and yet were still subjected to the whims of a handful of self-righteous board members. At first, I thought I could just ignore it. After all, I was in the right, wasn't I? I wasn't doing anything wrong. But then, the reality of it hit me: the HOA had the power to fine me indefinitely, to make my life a living hell. They had the power to force me to tear down my beloved garden, and they would stop at nothing to make sure their idea of perfection was enforced. And so, my fight began. But let me tell you, this was no ordinary fight. This wasn't just about a garden or a fine. This was about taking a stand against an organization that believed it could control my life, my property, and my peace of mind. It was about showing that, sometimes, the little guy can win, even against something as seemingly all-powerful as an HOA. Stay tuned to find out how this little garden turned into a full-scale battle, and how the HOA's overreach ended up causing them more problems than they bargained for. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The moment I decided to take action, I knew things were only going to escalate. I wasn't just fighting for my rain garden anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner who felt helpless, every person who had ever been silenced by the powerful hands of the HOA. This wasn't just about me, this was about challenging the status quo, standing up to a group of people who believed their rules were above the law. I remember the day I received the court date notification like it was yesterday. The date was set. I was going to have to face the HOA head-on. It was terrifying, and yet, I felt a surge of determination. I was ready. I wasn't going to let these people walk all over me, not when I had so much at stake. As the court date approached, I did everything I could to prepare. I studied the legal precedents, read every document Greg, my lawyer, sent over. I wrote my statement, every word was carefully chosen, every argument strategically placed. The rain garden wasn't just a decorative feature in my backyard, it was a symbol of everything I stood for: freedom, nature, and the right to make decisions about my own property. But I wasn't just relying on legal arguments. I was relying on the power of community. I reached out to my neighbors, making sure they were still with me. Tom, the retired lawyer, had rallied several of them to write letters of support, explaining how the HOA's overreach was damaging to the sense of community. Some of my neighbors had even come forward to testify about the general harassment they'd faced from the HOA in the past. I'll never forget the morning of the court hearing. My stomach was a ball of nerves, but I tried to stay calm. I put on my best suit, squared my shoulders, and walked into that courtroom like I was going into battle. Greg and I sat down, and across from us, there they were, the HOA board members. Karen, the president, sat at the head of the table, looking like she owned the place. Her face was set in that familiar, smug expression. She had a look in her eye that said, "This is my neighborhood, and I'll be damned if anyone tries to take it from me." As the hearing began, the judge, an older man with a thick stack of files in front of him, looked over the paperwork. He didn't seem particularly impressed by the HOA's case, and I felt a glimmer of hope. I could see that he was skeptical of their claims, but I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The HOA had deep pockets and the ability to drag this case out for as long as they wanted. This was going to be a battle of wills. Karen stood up first, speaking about the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood and how my rain garden violated their sacred rules. She presented photos of the garden, taken at odd angles, with exaggerated lighting to make it look more out of place than it really was. But I wasn't worried. I knew the truth. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly, cleared my throat, and began my defense. I started by talking about how the garden was designed with the environment in mind, how it had prevented flooding in our neighborhood during the last few heavy rains. I talked about how I had carefully chosen native plants, how the garden had brought color and life to my yard without disturbing anyone else's. I spoke from the heart, sharing how it wasn't just a garden, it was a symbol of my commitment to sustainability, of my desire to contribute to the community in a meaningful way. I even shared how the HOA had pushed other residents around, how they had made it nearly impossible for people to feel like they were truly home. I wasn't just talking about my garden anymore. I was talking about the culture of fear and control the HOA had created. I could feel the judge's eyes on me, and I could see the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then, Tom stood up. He was my secret weapon. As a retired lawyer, he knew how to argue his way through anything. He walked the judge through the legalities of the HOA's overreach, explaining how they couldn't simply impose arbitrary rules without clear justification. He pointed out the many times the HOA had violated local ordinances and how their actions had caused harm to the neighborhood. It was a devastating blow. The final nail in the coffin was when Greg, my lawyer, brought in an environmental expert. She explained how rain gardens were not only beneficial to the environment but were, in fact, encouraged by local government programs. She had documentation to back up her claims. The HOA had nothing to refute it. The tide was turning. After a tense silence, the judge adjourned the hearing, stating that he would issue his decision in a few days. As I left the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had done everything I could. Now, all I could do was wait. A few days later, the judge's decision came. I remember the feeling of holding that letter in my hands, not knowing what to expect. I opened it slowly, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the words, "The court finds in favor of the homeowner, Mr. Smith. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease and desist all actions concerning the removal of the rain garden. Additionally, the HOA is required to review its policies and make necessary amendments to prevent further misuse of authority." I couldn't believe it. We had won. Not only was I allowed to keep my garden, but the HOA was forced to revisit its entire policy on landscaping. My small act of defiance had sparked a ripple effect, forcing change in the very institution that had once held so much power over us. When I returned home, I stood in front of my garden, looking at the flowers, the shrubs, the rainwater collecting in the rocks. It wasn't just a garden, it was a symbol of what could happen when ordinary people stood up for their rights. It felt like a personal victory, but it also felt like a victory for the entire neighborhood. The battle wasn't just mine, it was a collective triumph. As word spread, more and more of my neighbors started questioning the HOA's practices. People who had once been too afraid to speak out now felt emboldened. It was as if the floodgates had opened. Neighbors who had quietly complied with unreasonable demands began to challenge the HOA's authority. Suddenly, the board was under pressure from all sides. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about our community standing up for fairness and accountability. As for Karen and the other board members, they were livid. But they knew better than to push further. The case had set a precedent, and they were no longer untouchable. It felt good to know that we had forced them to take a step back, to realize that they couldn't control us forever. For me, the real victory was standing in front of my garden, watching the plants sway gently in the breeze, knowing I had fought for it, and won. It wasn't just about keeping the garden, it was about standing up for what was right, for asserting my right to enjoy my home as I saw fit, and for setting an example for my neighbors. If you've ever had to fight for something you love, something that made your home feel like home, I want to hear your story. Like, share, and comment below with your experiences. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that went too far? Let's talk about it. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories for more stories like mine. You won't want to miss what's coming next.